Hello Warlords and Generals, welcome back to my channel. Today we will be covering a homebrew lore for my army for the Flesh Eater Courts. I have named them the Obsidian Court and they are from Axe. Without further ado, let's do a dive into this homebrew army that I created. When Sigmar did his rampage through the realm of Shyesh to get revenge on Nagash for abandoning the Pantheon at the Battle of the Burning Skies, he destroyed the Shroud Cage, unknowingly releasing the Carrion King upon the realms. He spread his madness, creating the first of the Flesh Eater Courts. And in Axe, one of his descendants managed to find a person roaming and turn them into the person that would become the vampire that leads the Obsidian Court. This man, whose name is now lost to time, would become known as Ash Eater, the Obsidian King, and this man was roaming the base of a mountain in Axe, and he was also leading a group of refugees from a destroyed home from the forces of chaos, and they were starving. This is when the descendant of the Carrion King came to him with a gift and chose him to become another abhorrent ghoul king, to create his own court within the realm of Axe in the shadow of this mountain. This volcano was constantly billowing ash within the shadow of it, and this affected the courts. This mountain was known as the Eternal Shroud, and it made it so members of the court that lived for longer developed much paler and ashier flaking skin, and due to the magics of Axe and living in the shadow of a mountain producing obsidian constantly, it turned the bones of all those members of the court into obsidian, thus the name given to this court. From the lowliest school all the way up to a Vargulf, every member had obsidian bones within this court. How many you had and how dense they were was how more important you were. For example, the ghouls, only the first layer of their bones were covered in obsidian. However, a Vargulf's bone were literally obsidian, and units such as the Horrors collected more obsidian because they, in their minds, believed they were items of status and approval. But really, they're just shoving obsidian shards right into their flesh. This makes them extra dangerous towards foes who have little to no armor, though, for their claws were already sharp, are now even sharper. For the vampires of the court, such as Ash Eater, have lived within the shadow of this mountain long enough to get a strange tinge to their magic. Whenever they cast their purple Shyechian death magic, it is always tinged with wisps of smoke and black outlines to it, and some survivors of their spells even claim feeling a heat to them as well. In terms of goals and function, this court acts a lot like the Hollowmorn court. They have a lot of horrors, which would be knights in their own mind, who like to go around and gather as many relics and magical artifacts as they can possible, or what they perceive to be as such. For example, they have literally carried boulders of obsidian back to their base, thinking it's a Pernumble engine in their own minds. The grand delusion of this court is that they simply believe that they live within a dwarf hold, living with other dwarves, and that they've made a pact with said dwarves to help them recover relics and artifacts from ages lost. They believe they live in grand, hollowed-out hallways with grand statues made from the greatest and masterful craftsmen amongst the dwarves. They believe that cannons lie in the upper echelon of the fortress, and they believe that armory upon armory of master-crafted weapons are simply waiting for the clarion call of battle to be held and used to defend the hold. However, this is not the case. They are a rampaging horde of horrors and ghouls that go out and attempt to find any artifacts or relics which they believe that they are returning to the dwarves, which in reality they are simply hoarding into piles or consuming, believing to become more and more one with the realm and even closer to their lord. Ash Eater himself, being the progenitor of this court, suffers the greatest from this grand delusion, which is no surprise considering the coverage we've had of the previous courts. The Ghoul Kings are always the most mad of them, besides the Archregents. Ash Eater himself, however, believes himself to be more a man of the people, a humble townsperson rather than a proper king. though everyone treats him as such as the king. He wears lavish clothing. He always carries with him two master-crafted scimitars, a pendant around his neck that allows him the most basic levels of Shyish type magic, and he rides into battle on a majestic griffin known as Small Glider, though the truth of all of this is, of course, false. The Ghoul King himself is, like most, a ravaged beast of intense fury and savagery on the battle, slinging spells and ripping people's heads off in almost one single motion. And Small Glider is not a griffin at all, but a terrorgeist, and a very aggressive one at that. Small Glider himself has a very unique trait amongst the terrorgeists, in that he can billow out smog in large clouds, creating a wall of line of sight on the court itself, causing enemies to be confused on which angle they could even be coming from. He is the single deadliest creature within the entire army, besides Ash Eater himself, and when they both ride to battle, I pity the poor enemy that has to face both of these monsters at the same time. This court mostly fields ghouls and has a very large number of horrors compared to even others, almost comparing to the Hollow Morn in how many knights that they field, with very few flayers in the Mingo. The true goals of Ash Eater are hard to discern, mostly because of how insane he is. It's even hard to tell if he knows what his goals are anymore. All that is known is that they will go out, raid caravans, small villages, towns, and even vaults if they're feeling brave enough to raid them and collect the treasure and bring them back, creating huge hordes of treasure like I mentioned before. And very few within the realm know that it's there, but those that do ended up trying to raid it by either force or stealth, but only end up becoming the court's next meal and their treasures being added to the piles. And on that note, we are actually going to cover the two big events within Akshi that this court was a part of, and we are going to start with the raid of Fire and Lightning. A local hold had been giving so many reports about this court raiding its caravans and its treasure vaults that this local Stormcast decided to finally do something about it. And then they also visited a Flyer Slayer hold to hire them as mercenaries to help them bring down the court. So they found the location of the court's ruins and castle, quotes around castle, and they charged in, only to find that the city was covered in a very dense fog and smog, so dense they could barely see their hands in front of each other, and they realized that there were no enemies around. They lowered their weapons and tried to search for the entrance to where the treasures could be. This, however, proved a fatal mistake, and they fell right into Ash Eater's hands, as soon as the weapons were lowered, the ghouls came from outside of buildings, mounds of corpses that they hid under, piles of ash that they covered themselves in, and ambushed both the Stormcast and the Fire Slayers. You see, the smog was created by Smog Glider and Ash Eater himself, who covered the ruins and seeing that this army was approaching from the sky, so that he created this ambush in order to defeat them. And as lightning bolt after lightning bolt shot up into the sky, the Fire Slayers realized that this raid was a loss and they attempted a retreat. However, Ash Eater also calculated that this would happen, and he left his knights outside the smog, and any that would leave, they charged and slaughtered. Very few Fire Slayers left alive that day. Amongst the casualties was actually the Prince of the Hold itself, and the heir to it, causing the Fire Slayers to have an internal grudge against this particular Flesh Eater court. As the ghouls, knights, and even Ash Eater himself scoured the battlefield of corpses for any treasure, and as they enjoyed their meals and devoured the bodies, Ash Eater himself found the prince's body, where he took an amulet with condensed fire within it as his trophy from this battle. Other raids by both armies, and even conjoined again, would be attempted, but this was the single largest raid attempted by either of them, and none would even come close to that size again, because they did not want to commit that much forces to it, but they did want to attempt to recover some of the lost treasure, each one has failed. Each one has failed to Ash Eater's cunning and brutality. The second major battle that the Obsidian Court was a part of was one that created a new geographical area just south of their ruins, and it has remained to be a warning to those who attempt to take on this court. To them, it is a land of is grounds for the sacred tombs and graves for heroes and kings past. However, it is simply a barren, broken, empty space of broken wood and bone. This is the story on how the Splintered Vale was created. When the court was small, they did patrols around their land to make sure that no one would come and destroy them. As the court grew bigger and bigger, the patrols went out further and further, and eventually went into the forests of the Sylvaneth of this area. These Sylvaneth eventually started killing the court's patrols and ghouls, and Ash Eater was tired of it, so eventually the two started to clash more and more. And one day, the Sylvaneth gathered in one large area for a significantly larger battle with the court, probably their last one, win or lose. And slowly, they'd realize that the sky began to darken more and more, and ash started to fall heavier and heavier. After a week long of ash falling on this area, Ash Eater himself charged in and destroyed the Sylvaneth. The battle was long. The Sylvaneth put up a very good fight, but in the end, the court of the Obsidian King would prove too much for these Sylvaneth, and they retreated from this area. The court chased after the Sylvaneth, making sure they took down as many as possible as they could to send them a message. Now, this area and the immediate area around the ruins and the castles that the courts call themselves home have no trees at all. And this vale had become nothing. Where once trees and fauna would grow here, even in Akshi, it is now nothing but a barren no man's land of shattered trees and broken bones. A show of power and cunning of Ash Eater to show that the Sylvaneth should never return, for this ground is now so choked with ash and cursed blood of the court, nothing can grow here as long as the court itself exists. The Sylvaneth have moved on from this area, knowing that the folly that they made, but they now continue to do lightning raids against the court to vent their frustrations at the loss of life and tree brethren to this court. If one were to stand in this vale, it would be miles and miles upon barren, empty land with nothing but skeletons, broken bones, shattered trees, and even some Sylvaneth corpses remaining. And it is all just, and the court themselves does not populate this area, for Ash Eater himself wants it to be like a show of power, to show that any who dare attempt to kill his children, this is the consequences of that decision. And that was my homebrew for my Flesh Eater core army. I hope you enjoyed this. This is something kind of new. Instead of doing just general lore coverage, I wanted to share with you my addition to the lore itself with my army, because it's kind of this whole story idea is what led me to start my army, and I hope it helps some of you out there to think of your own stories and influence you to start your own armies with a specific theme and setting in mind. We have reached the end of the video, though. I hope you enjoyed this new take on a video that I'm trying out. If you liked the video, please like it. If you disliked it, please dislike it. Tell me in the comments why you liked or disliked it. If you'd like to see more from me on my lore coverage and even my own unique lore within this setting, hit subscribe. I try to upload at least once every 2 to 3 weeks. And I hope to see and hear from all of you soon. This is Tabhammer out, and I hope you all have a lovely day.